Why was the most important ancient Egyptian god so often forgotten?
Most people can recognize the famous animal-headed gods like Thoth or Anubis, but what about Heka?
If you don't recognize him, don't worry. This image is just one of many ways people drew this god.
In fact, the way Heka looked wasn't very important. More often, Egyptians didn't draw Heka at all, but referred to him, using hieroglyphs, as the god of magic.
And I think this is why Heka is so poorly known today compared to other Egyptian gods, because the ancient Egyptian concept of magic is very different to our own.
Where would you rank a god of magic in the hierarchy of gods? Some people might make him a trickster god, like Loki, or a source of wisdom, like Athena, but Heka was more than this. He was the firstborn of all the Egyptian gods, for by him the universe was made and is sustained.
For Heka was more than just a god. In ancient Egyptian, his name is the same word for magic and for magician.
This is more than the story of a forgotten deity. This is the history of how ancient Egyptians imagined the cosmic life force which controlled their universe and touched on every area of their existence, from birth to law to religion, to medicine, to government, and even to death.
This is the story of ancient Egyptian magic.
Hi, I'm Josh, and welcome to Blue Fawn, an AI-free channel where we look at religious and esoteric history. I hope you have as much fun watching this video as I have making it. If you're watching this, I need your help. Your vote in the community will affect the future of this channel. The first mention of Heka is found in the tomb of Pharaoh Sahuri, built around 2500 BC. Here Heka leads the other gods, bringing offerings to the king. Around the same time we read about a group of doctors who were described as priests of Heka. By 2000 BC, a collection of spells to help the dead, called the coffin texts, tell us more about this mysterious god. I am the son of him who gave birth to the universe. I caused the other gods to live. I have seated myself as Lord of Kaz, for to me belonged the universe before you gods came into being. I am Heka.
When the creator god Re-Atum decided to make the world, Heka already existed. When this creator made these sacred words, the Hu or the Logos, it was Heka who breathed life into them and gave them their creative power. No wonder the other gods quake in his presence.
His powers put fear into the gods who came into being after him. Heka came into being of himself, who created the mountains and knit the heavens together. You might have noticed that part of Heka's name uses this hieroglyph, showing two hands pointing to the sky. This is the word for Ka in Egyptian, the Egyptian concept of the life force. It's what keeps everything around us moving, breathing, and aware. So when Heka says he is Lord of Kaz, he is claiming the power of life and death over the universe.
The modern equivalent would be having control over every atom in existence and being able to change or destroy it at will. Heka can hack reality itself because he is reality.
Although some gods sometimes claim to be safe from Heka, more often we see them using magic in much the same way a human being would. Isis, who is reportedly skilled in magic, uses it to discover another god's name. Later, when her son Horus is stung by a scorpion, she runs to Thoth, who will heal him with his magical knowledge. Heka magic is even used by the gods because it is simply part of the fabric of the universe. It is neither a good nor an evil force. It is power that can bend reality itself, and the divine embodiment of that power was the god Heka.
A great example of the limitless power of Heka can be found in an ancient Egyptian story. The tale of two brothers isn't explicitly about magic, but it is based on the idea there is a source of limitless power in the universe.
In the story, two brothers who work as cattle farmers are separated by an argument. The younger brother goes to live in a beautiful forested oasis. The gods have compassion in him and use creative magic to breathe life into a wax woman who becomes his wife. But then this wife leaves him to become the pharaoh's lover. Frightened of her husband, she tells the pharaoh to cut down a tree where her husband's soul is resting on a flower. Immediately the younger brother passes away. Learning of his brother's fate from a mug of frothy beer, the older brother arrives, finds his younger brother's heart, and places it in a bowl of cold water. Suddenly the younger brother is reborn as a bull. He goes to the pharaoh's palace, where he is welcomed as a divine animal. Secretly, he confronts his unfaithful wife. Terrified once more, his wife persuades the pharaoh to sacrifice the bull, ending her husband's life for a second time. But 2 drops of the bull's blood fall to the ground as it is being carried into the city, and overnight, 2 full-grown trees spring up where they fell. Curious, the wife goes to examine the trees and is shocked to hear her husband's voice coming from them. He has been reborn for a 3rd time. Now his wife persuades the pharaoh to chop down the trees and have them made into planks. To make sure there are no mistakes, she watches the carpenters at work. But then a tiny splinter flies into her mouth and becomes lodged in her stomach.
It makes her pregnant, and soon enough she gives birth to a son, believing it is the pharaoh's. In fact, the boy is her husband, reborn. When he grows up and the old pharaoh passes away, he tells the astonished scribes and priests about his life. Later he invites the older brother to court, and the 2 men are happily reunited. With sufficient Heka, anything was possible. A cowherd could become pharaoh.
Naturally, many Egyptians wanted to access a little bit of this Heka power themselves. It was more valuable than nuclear launch codes or the most refined AI scripts. So how could you access the power of Heka? Perhaps the most important way was through writing and images. For scribes, the 2 were often closely connected. In the ancient Egyptian mindset, what was written or drawn was not just a way of symbolizing reality. It directly shaped the world. The earliest example of this is in the image of bound and defeated enemies. From as early as 3000 BC, the Egyptians were making images of tied-up prisoners of war. In some cases, they served as door hinges or chariot wheels. They were even drawn on the pharaoh's literal sandals. This wasn't just a symbolic artistic motif, this was war magic, a way to attack and defeat enemies of the state. Each time the pharaoh walked in his shoes, he was, through the power of sympathetic magic, crushing and defeating his enemies.
This belief in a connection between image and reality reflected how hieroglyphs were written as well. The pyramid texts, composed around 2000 BC, are a series of spells designed to protect the pharaoh's spirit in the afterlife. What is interesting is how often words are mutilated or missed out in the text.
This wasn't a mistake on the part of the scribe. It was simply unwise to fully write the name of a demon or hostile god without blanking it out or cutting it up. To leave the full hieroglyph on the wall would actually give power to that dangerous spirit.
When these spells were written down on papyrus, the colour red was reserved for the names of particular demons. It's possible a special scribe called the Redhead was responsible for specifically writing these names. We can imagine him as the ancient equivalent of a man in a nuclear reactor responsible for managing the plutonium rods. One fatal scribal mistake could change a text of protection into a dangerous curse.
Because of this emphasis on writing and secret knowledge, many Egyptian practitioners of magic were members of the educated elite. Heka, after all, was a mysterious god force, accessible through ancient texts written near the beginning of creation. In the Westcar Papyrus, written around 1650 BC, we find several extraordinary tales of Egyptian magic.
The Westcar Papyrus is a brilliant piece of ancient literature. It comprises 5 interconnected stories, a bit like my dark fantasy novel, but all exploring the use of Heka. Many of the early stories are set in the past, relating magnificent feats performed by legendary magicians.
In one case, an ancient pharaoh is bored and asks his high priest for advice. This man is responsible for reading the sacred words from magical texts. Naturally, he is also a skilled magician. He suggests that the pharaoh invite a selection of beautiful young women to row on the lake. The heart of your majesty will be gladdened by seeing them row back and forth and seeing the beautiful reeds and watersides. The bored pharaoh agrees, and the priest organizes the event. To his delight, the pharaoh does find himself feeling better as he watches the maidens, but then suddenly they stop rowing. One of the women has lost a malachite hair clasp in the water.
The pharaoh starts to feel grumpy and immediately offers to buy the woman a new hair clasp. Quite unreasonably, she refuses, and everyone stops rowing.
Now the magical high priest resolves these comparatively petty problems with his amazing magic. With a sacred spell, he doubles the water on one side of the lake, leaving the other half dry ground. Then he walks along the bottom and recovers her hair clasp. The women resume their rowing. The pharaoh is delighted. The tale ends happily.
However, we do have some serious questions after hearing this story. If this is how the priest uses his power for a comparatively unimportant situation, what will he do when his back is against the wall? What's the limit of his magical abilities? And if he's that powerful, why doesn't he just become pharaoh himself? Luckily, the story is set in the past tense, long, long ago, so we don't need to worry about that.
In another story, we hear about a different ancient magician who discovered his wife was cheating on him. To get revenge, he made a wax model of a crocodile, brought it to life, and had it eat his rival. He then shows off the beast to the pharaoh, who agrees he has acted justly. It's lucky, we suppose, the pharaoh didn't fancy the magician's wife for himself.
You can probably sense where these stories are leading. The Papyrus shifts genre from a collection of fantastical ancient tales to a modern political horror story. The tense changes from past to present, and a real-life pharaoh invites a real magician to his court.
This time the threat is explicit. The man prophesies that in a town in Egypt, 3 children are about to be born who will end the current dynasty and become pharaohs themselves. Heka is supreme over political power. You can imagine a pharaoh or crown prince listening to someone read this story and getting chills down their spine.
But maybe this is just a male scribe's fantasy. Was this really how magic was viewed at the pharaoh's court? Luckily, we have a real-life example of something like the last story in action. Powerful magicians using their magic against the pharaoh.
Around 1160 BC, the court of Ramesses III experienced a crisis created by the pharaoh's refusal to name a first wife and successor. Queen Tie took matters into her own hands. She began a conspiracy to end the pharaoh and place her son on the throne. There were plenty of willing accomplices, a military commander, several women at court, servants, stewards, and a priest and magician. Most importantly, they secured the support of the keeper of the royal library, where the most powerful and sacred books of magic were kept. This man leaked spells to the conspirators, who used them to make wax figurines and potions to harm the pharaoh. We only know about this case because the conspiracy failed, and the traitors were brought to court, many suffering a gruesome end. They had used Heka against the pharaoh in the same way it would be used against his enemies.
It is likely where assassination attempts succeeded. For example, in the case of Meternich I, magic was still at play. In fact, we know this was the case because his son commissioned a series of curse tablets attacking the conspirators he blamed for his father's passing.
Such were the dangers of magic at the royal court, but perhaps the most brutal expression of Heka can be found in the military. Around 1800 BC, a series of dramatic magical rituals were carried out at the Egyptian fortress of Mergissa in Nubia. Over 200 clay jars were inscribed with magical spells connecting them to enemies of Egypt before being smashed to bits. They were accompanied by almost 400 clay figurines and 3 limestone statues. Since limestone was not local to the area, it's likely these last 3 were sent as examples from the pharaoh's court to aid the local priests in making their spells. Alongside these finds is the decapitated body of a Nubian prisoner, their skulls surrounded by the remains of melted wax figurines.
This wasn't a sacrifice to the gods, this was an attempt to use powerful sympathetic magic, linking the fate of the prisoner to the enemies outside the fort.
Probably such a shocking ritual improved the morale of the isolated soldiers so far from their homes. In the Egyptian magical mindset, it also actively contributed to the army's power, protecting it against foreign magicians and using Heka in the same way soldiers use swords and spears.
So far, we've seen Heka being used by priests and scribes and magicians. In fact, often it seems one person is all three of those at the same time. But ancient Egypt boasted a huge magical industry which extended far beyond the court and the army.
Commoners watched the incense burned by the priests curl upwards against the temple walls, rolling into the carved crevices of the hieroglyphs and activating their power. The most famous link between illiterate Egyptians and written magic is found in the New Kingdom shrines, showing the image of Horus holding two crocodiles. The image of a god overcoming malevolent forces was recognizable to everyone. Covering the stele was also a sacred text that few people could actually read. They accessed its power by bathing the statue in water and drinking or washing from the dip, where the hieroglyphically infused liquid collected.
Remember those first priests of Heka from 2500 BC? They were also doctors. These men didn't think about the world as divided into a spiritual and physical realm like some people do today. Rather, everything was connected, meshed together, and so it made perfect sense to empirically measure the effectiveness of magical spells.
From about 1500 BC, scribes began to compile huge lists of healing and protection spells. These are sometimes called the medical papyri. Although this term can be confusing for a modern audience, these were magical words and rituals measured by their effectiveness. Since many priests served on a rotational basis, it was easy to go out into the community for a couple of months and practice the spells contained in the temple books. The priests could then return and report on what they had found. Magic has power over a remedy. Do you remember that Horus was taken with Seth to the great palace in Heliopolis, where one negotiated regarding the members of Seth with Horus? Thus he will be healthy. Recite when drinking a remedy. Truly effective. Proved millions of times.
Here the spell draws on a mythological story, using its Heka to infuse the magic potion that's about to be drunk. Thanks to the reports of healing priests, the scribe could confirm this was an effective spell.
This idea of practical magic at work in the community is found in other records too. One of the most dangerous moments in a cattle herder's life was fording the river with his cows. Crocodiles and currents might take him or his animals. Naturally, this is a common scene in Egyptian wall paintings. Standing on the bank, we often find a well-dressed figure with a staff or wand in the process of speaking a spell. The magician is using his power to protect the men and their cattle. A spell for fording a river is actually recorded in the Harris Magical Papyrus, which states the secret must not be shared with those outside the House of Life. That is, the temple school where all scribes and priests were trained.
A travelling priest-magician's box from about 1200 BC gives us a clearer picture of what some of these magicians in the community might have looked like. Inside is a small ivory statue of a herdsman carrying a calf across a river, probably to be used in sympathetic magic. There's also a series of magical spells written on papyrus fragments. There's a collection of small amulets, a mass of tangled hair curled around a small bronze cobra.
The box itself was inscribed with the image of a jackal, hinting at the hieroglyph, meaning keeper of secrets.
In my fantasy novel The Curse of the Fawn, the main character also carries a kind of magician's box, although in that case the story is set in the Roman Empire and the magician is viewed as a threatening source of outside external power. As we've seen in ancient Egypt, the opposite was the case. Magicians had been educated at religious schools and were part of the royal establishment.
The owner of that box appears to have been a generalist magician with expertise in a number of different rituals, but in other cases, where the community was large and wealthy enough, magicians began to specialize. We know this because of the records from Deir el-Medina, a unique settlement where laborers who worked on the tombs of the kings lived together. These men had high wages and occupied a unique place in Egyptian society. Some bought medical papyri for their own collections. They acted as informal doctors in the community. Alongside them were actual physicians paid for by the state, also using effective Heka to diagnose and treat. A ritual specialist, the scorpion charmer, was used when addressing bites and stings from insects, animals, or evil spirits who could also inject venom. Finally, when the source of an illness remained a mystery to all these practitioners, the patient was sent to the wise woman who lived outside the community but was an expert in relational problems between humans, gods, and spirits.
Although she didn't do magic herself, the wise woman was able to point the patient in the direction of which relation they needed to fix in order to be healed, which god or goddess was upset with them, which ancestor or dead spirit was seeking vengeance, or who in the community had used magic against them.
So we find a letter written by a parent whose children had passed away in someone else's care. "Hey, why haven't you gone to the wise woman to ask about the 2 boys? What were their destinies and fortunes? You must inquire about this matter for me and their mother. Write down the names of the gods she mentions, obey any orders she gives you." In a late mythological story from 300 BC, the goddess Isis herself consults a wise woman about her sick son. When she understands where the illness comes from, she then visits Thoth, representing the literate priest who provides the magical cure. Most Egyptian texts present magicians as men, although in temples with priestesses, it's possible women also did magic. We know Heka was invoked in childbirth because we've discovered so many magical wands designed to be used by midwives to protect the mother and child.
What is clear is that in ancient Egypt, while there were dangerous female demons, there's no concept of the witch as we have it today. Using magic was not evil or good, it was simply a fact of life.
There was another important part of society which was bound up with this power, the realm of law and justice.
Heka famously claimed to be Lord of Oracles. It made sense that he knew what was going to happen since he had been so intimately involved in creating the universe, but divine oracles were also part of the ancient Egyptian justice system.
The Egyptian courtroom was usually a large temple courtyard, with the town elders and priests acting as the judges. When both sides had been heard, a judgment was made. Where the matter was unclear, the priest might seek an oracle from the deity in the temple. This might involve praying or fasting, or spending the night below the god's statue, waiting for a dream to provide guidance. Once the priest had obtained the message from the god, they would pass judgment.
In theory, everyone would accept the decision of the oracle and a judgment would be carried out. In practice, people often questioned the revelations from divine oracles. We have one story of a man who was accused of stealing clothes from the temple. The priest slept the night under the statue, came out in the morning and said the gods had indeed accused this man of doing it. The man vociferously denied it so intensely that they decided it was best to seek a second oracle. The priest sought a second oracle with the gods. He had another dream, and again he was convinced that this man had been chosen by the gods because he had committed the crime. The man denied it a third time, but this time everyone was getting quite bored and they simply accused him and beat him up a bit.
Although in this case everyone present seems to have considered the suspect guilty, there was still an element of doubt about the oracle. Since the gods themselves were subject to Heka power, a powerful magician could disrupt the oracular process. This is why we find amulet spells protecting against harsh oracles. We also find letters to the gods written on pieces of cracked pottery, pleading for decisions in the favour of the person who commissioned the petition.
Over 2,500 years, the idea of Heka in ancient Egypt was relatively stable, even as practices came and went. During the Middle Kingdom, the birth wands were very popular. Around 1500 BC, people began to compile those long lists of magical medical papyri, and it was about 1000 BC that the famous healing shrines for Horus and the crocodiles started to appear. Despite this, there was a surprising amount of continuity, and that's partly because ancient Egyptians valued anything that was old. The older the spell, the older the book and the incantation, the closer it was to the original creative Heka which had made the universe. One beautiful legacy of Heka is the tradition of Egyptian magical poetry, because the image and the word were so closely connected and were so powerful in shaping reality. Egyptian spells are often exciting verbal displays which are arresting to us even in translation. Take, for example, this incantation found on one of the healing shrines of Horus and the crocodiles.
I have recited from your magic, O Horus. I have spoken from your glorious words. I have brought into being what your heart has created. Come to me quickly, quickly today. Repulse from me every lion of the desert, all crocodiles on the water, all mouths which sting. Make them for me like a stone of the desert, like a broken piece of pottery lying in the street. Extract for me the rushing poison which is in every limb of the sufferer. For behold, your name is pronounced today. I am Horus, the Saviour.
As we'll see in later videos, this immense, sometimes beautiful tradition would have a tremendous impact on Greek and Roman culture and would even come to influence Christianity.
So although Egyptian magic is quite different to popular ideas in the West today, we cannot understand Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings without beginning in ancient Egypt.
So after finishing our series on the Roman mystery cults, this video is the start of a new series looking at magic in the Greco-Roman world. It's just the beginning of an adventure. But I want to know what you think. What do you think of ancient Egyptian magic? Let me know in the comments, and see you next time.